All right, it's 7 a.m. Pacific time here in California. Let's go ahead and get it started. Thank you all for joining our virtual event today. What you have on the screen is today's agenda. All attendees will be muted throughout the session, but are welcome to submit your questions at any time. We realize the industry needs to work together more so than ever. As such, we've been hosting a series of webinars and roundtable discussions, but with careful curation. Last month, we brought leaders from 35 international airports together for sharing their implementation of high-tech and low-tech aimed at reopening. And today, we're delighted to shed some lights on business travel with phenomenal leadership from world's biggest hotel chain, the best airline alliance, and one of the most prestigious CVC in the travel industry. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Leo Chen. I'm with Plug and Play, a venture capital group based in Silicon Valley. We run world's largest corporate innovation platform across 17 different industries, including brand and retail, travel and hospitality, smart cities, and sustainability. Our ventures team invests in 200 early stage startups every year, and about 1% of them turn into unicorns, including companies like N26, Rappi, SoundHound, and Applyboard. For travel and hospitality, we partner with 36 companies and organizations, including airlines, airports, travel management companies, and hospitality brands. Our goal is to work with them to identify true industry challenges and do a whole sourcing process where we get to identify great startups for our partners to do pilots, proof of concepts, and licensing deals. Since 2016, Plug and Play Travel has accelerated over 200 startups across 10 batches. We made direct investments in 25 startups and fostered over 100 engagements between our corporate partners and startups. Our offices for the travel practice are located in Silicon Valley, Singapore, Vienna, Geneva, Abu Dhabi, and Shanghai. Since COVID-19, our accelerator programs and private deal flows have gone 100% virtual. Thanks to our anchor corporate partners, we are now in the process of shortlisting startups from our top 100 list to be virtually invited to our selection day on August 26th and pitch their COVID or non-COVID technologies, covering 8 different themes as highlighted on your screen. As always, the accelerator program will run for 3 months, which is separate from the private deal flows we host for individual corporate partners that bring together 4 to 6 high-quality, high-relevancy startups based on proprietary focus areas. Lastly, startups in our ecosystem are truly stage agnostic and geographically dispersed. Plug and Play's unique setup allows us to bring late-stage startups from other industries into our beloved travel and hospitality industry for cross-pollination. Now on to COVID-19. Let's start with some positive news. Just 2 days ago, S&P 500 briefly turned positive for the year, marking the completion of a V-shaped recovery in the US equity market. That is nothing short of a miracle. However, what you see on the screen is the untold story about how the entire travel, hospitality, and leisure sector is lagging behind. OTAs are still down 23%, hotels 36%, airlines 47%, cruises 67%. Many organizations had no choice but to turn to private equity for capitals. And as such, you read headlines like Silver Lake getting involved with Airbnb and Expedia, Blackstone betting on Crown, Bain buying Virgin Australia, Centaurus ingesting cash into the mothership of TripAdvisor, so on and so forth. When our Shanghai office sent me this slide from Bain last week, it hit a soft spot in my heart and kind of solidified our commitment to hosting this virtual event. While the slide is a bit overwhelming, it does tell us that in the States, in United States, only 23% of the business travelers report that their employer allows them to travel overnight. And out of those companies that say yes to business travel, less than 50% of the business travelers are actually willing to do overnight travel in the next 6 months. So how do we address this as an industry? What do we do to ensure their safety and well-being at every step of the journey? With great delight, allow me to introduce Peggy Fong Rowe, Global Officer of Customer Experience, Loyalty, and New Ventures at Marriott. I had the pleasure of meeting with Peggy at her office in Hong Kong over Thanksgiving in 2019 when we first announced the Anchor Partnership. As a member of Marriott's global executive team, Peggy and her CX org were the linchpin that brought Marriott and Plug and Play together. With that, thank you, Peggy. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Leo. Let me just share my screen here. Oh, let's see. There we go. Great. Let me start by just saying thank you, Leo, for that nice, kind introduction. And sorry, I think my video is off, right? There we go. Hi, everyone. My hair was quite short in that photo. I guess that's a sign of the times, right? As Leo mentioned, I was previously the Chief Sales and Marketing Officer in Asia Pacific for the last 6.5 years for Marriott. And in January, I took on a new role as Global Officer of Customer Experience, Loyalty, and New Ventures. And so I was incredibly delighted to meet Leo and Plug and Play at the kind of end of my tail end of time in Asia. And coming into this new role, we had a lot of new ideas to come. But as we fast forward and you know, I guess the word of the day would be disruption, right? And since you all are likely innovators on this call, I think starting this job in January was incredibly exciting. Everything that happened 3 months later, while I thought I was going to have to create disruption from the inside to be able to do some of the things I wanted to do in my new role, flash forward, disruption was created for me. And if anything, I think we fast forwarded 5 years and we've created an environment here where it's even more fertile for quite a lot of things that we hope to do. And some of the things that were seeds of ideas have all of a sudden become accelerated. And I think my perspective on that after having been in this for a couple months is that I don't think anybody could have expected, predicted, projected, not any of the risk managers, the crisis management companies, or the consultants could have projected this kind of disruption. And so it's actually quite a thrilling place to be for someone like me and my profile, and probably for most of you. So I thought I'd just take a few minutes to share a little bit about what we're doing at Marriott, and mostly focused on inspiring business travel. But I'll tell you that a lot of the conversation is actually about something quite different. We're clearly focused on business travel, but demand is kind of pushing us in new and different ways. And so let me just dig in here. A couple of themes for what I would say we are kind of living and breathing by right now is living in the insights every day, every moment, every hour, reading everything we can to try to make sure that what we're doing is deeply rooted in customer sentiment, trends, and everything that's happening around us. Trying to make sure that every action we take is really about being relevant to customers, even though we're trying to make sure we're doing the right thing for the business and everything else. That's obviously incredibly important for a company whose, business, people basically are not traveling. That's our core customer. What do you do about that? Make sure what you're saying to them and engaging them with is relevant. And then I love this last one, but this has created the impetus for us to change, test, move fast, and engage. And you've certainly been reading that our whole industry has had to furlough people, and with the smaller staff, it's been tough, but it's caused us to have to do some of these things in a much more different way. And so I think all of these things can be great and a silver lining. I use this example because, on Marriott.com, if you went there today, this is what you would see. And it'd be dramatically different than what you would normally see. So 10% off private homes and rentals. I'm actually sitting in Hong Kong today, but my background here is in France, in Paris. I guess this whole situation allows us to be anywhere we want to be, even, in the same place, in two different places at one time. But our homes and villas business has really kind of taken off, and we started it just a year ago. Now we find it to be one of the highest performing brands and products in our portfolio, and that was pretty unexpected. Eat Around Town is a concept around dining, and all of a sudden we started doubling the membership in our dining program because people could earn points when they dine in restaurants near Marriott's that we've identified for the program. And Marriott Boutiques, which you may or may not know that we've had, but you can actually build your own hotel room in your very own home, and you can buy all the products of the St. Regis and Edition and W hotels so that you can travel to a hotel room without ever leaving. But these products and services have been kind of the ones with the plus marks beside them in terms of growth in the last couple of months. And that's been really intriguing to me as someone who's leading new ventures and new businesses. I thought I'd take a moment and just share with you, I'm sure you all have your own data and insights, but you might enjoy triangulating them against ours. My team is responsible for data, insights, strategy, customer experience design, loyalty, and our new businesses. Every week we kind of look at these macro trends, you know, as you've seen, cases have accelerated in the US, the rebound around the world in multiple markets. I'm living here in Hong Kong. We've been largely living life as normal, aside from wearing masks, until 3 days ago, when literally everything shut down again, back to basically April, May levels. And then, of course, we're watching closely unemployment and how that affects people's spending, and then the government stimulus around that. But we're clearly, you know, tracking with the macro trends, as all of you who work in the industry probably are. When we look at travel and mobility, flight capacity for domestic and international routes have been down 38% and 80% across the board, except for China. We're seeing drive market business that probably is very intuitive, right? We're seeing that particularly in Europe kind of pop week over week. And then you can see down here some stats on industry-wide occupancies hovering around 20 to 30% in May, and across all regions except for China. And industry-wide books, rooms on the books, as you can see, are down, obviously year over year, but we're slightly starting to improve. I think with the new trends of the last couple of weeks, we'll see what that brings. And then when we were also keeping an eye on search, so we look at flight search and hotel search and Marriott search. And this is, you know, week over week data, which is why you're seeing these comments. But we saw air travel search pick up for quite a few weeks, particularly through summer. The recent trends have kind of slowed that, and then with the exception of Europe and UAE, which seems to be picking up. So they're kind of coming out of where they were. And then what's interesting in our own data is, you know, like a couple months ago, we saw leisure destinations just start to pop, which we're largely a business travel company. Not to say that we're not in leisure, but it was interesting to see all of a sudden these destinations show up in the top rankings. But you can see in the recent weeks again that the top markets like Orlando, Virginia Beach, Hilton Head, those markets have started to go negative. And so that's just an indication of what you're also seeing and experiencing and reading in the news. From a consumer perspective, the trends that continue, the interest in leisure, we're very focused right now on leisure and trying to capitalize on that. Part of that is summer, and part of that is obviously pent-up demand for people sitting in their homes, and because most businesses are not traveling. Expectations, though, on safety and the clarity around what hotels are doing is incredibly important and has been placing a lot of pressure on our customer experience. I'll talk about that. We're obviously watching financial confidence very closely, and we see customers, of course, looking for value. Some emerging things from a consumer perspective. We've been looking at the stats around, of course, consumer confidence, and with new hotspots emerging, we're definitely seeing in the US, the number of people who felt safe going out for leisure declined pretty substantially in the last 2 to 3 weeks. There's new hotspots in Asia are starting to create new worries because for Hong Kong, this is like the third wave. Although in China, in Beijing, and in Asia in general, they've been able to clamp down on hotspots pretty quickly. But the thing that has been top of mind for the last couple of weeks is what other people might term as bad behavior from other travelers. Like, sure, hotels have done a lot to make sure that they're clean and secure, but what about the other people I'm traveling with? And that's, a much harder thing to deal with. And then this whole theme of work from anywhere, right? We're all working from anywhere, and coupled with what happens to schools in the fall, I think will create new interesting opportunities and challenges for everyone, and hopefully some opportunities for either people wanting to travel, young people kind of wanting to work from anywhere or being able to work from anywhere and traveling as a result, as well as families. I see a lot of people traveling right now because they can, but the complications of them sort of doing their video conferencing from the hotel room and everybody in the background is kind of a new challenge. Thus, our Homes and Villas product has been doing really well because you've got bedrooms and kitchens and, you're pretty cordoned off from others. So I'm going to move quickly. We're talking about corporate travel today here. So this is a survey that we do with our global accounts, and 47% of global travel managers are saying that they're only allowing essential travel and that you must get sign off, and 54% anticipate they'll open up in the next 2 to 3 months, but they will still need some sort of approval. And if I were to just highlight the 3 themes, which I think Leo kind of suggested, that in this space, safety and liability is the number 1 theme, right? The travel liability is causing companies to need to know what the protocols are for the hotel. The duty of care is really many companies making travel either optional or requiring them to book so they know where they are. And then this idea of travel bubbles or clean routes may provide some sort of opportunity for some countries, and businesses to be able to travel more safely, coupled with cost savings, budget reductions, of course. And then this whole thing, which we started talking about before everyone jumped on the call, is, how will virtual and face-to-face sort of interact, moving over here to the right too. I think the forced adoption has made people much more comfortable and the technology has improved, but there's all of these questions to the right, like, can virtual release really be more effective? Some of the big meetings you thought could never go online, and you see companies kind of getting 2 and 3 and 5 times the attendance as a result. At the same time, you have people asking, well, maybe it's working really well because of social capital I've built with all these people that I know, that I work with, but what happens when I start a new company, or what happens when I'm meeting somebody new? Can I create the same connections? Will there be more measurable factors when deciding to go travel? And what will be the long-term implications of really physical space for corporates, right? And we're playing in all of these spaces in terms of innovation and, as I mentioned, trying things and partnering with our customers to just say, okay, throw everything out the window. Like, what do you need? And how could we help you solve that, right? We're kind of starting from square one with our customers and just saying, look, like, it's a crazy time. Like, how can we work together to facilitate what you need to do to run your business? I'll quickly highlight a few things. We have our commitment to clean. You may have heard about it, but it is really, the number 1 thing we're focused on is anything that we can do to help inspire confidence. And it's not just confidence of consumers, but it's also making sure our associates feel confident that they can come to work and it's a safe place and that they can deliver the service that they want to deliver. Our approach is, maybe started with sanitation guidelines, but it has become much more holistic around everything that we're doing in the hotel and the end-to-end experience. We've got 3 key pillars of our strategy. We've got a global cleanliness council. We have the protocols and products that we've made sort of mandates in all of our hotels. And then I think the key piece is our associates and how we train and engage them around this commitment to cleanliness. And we've gotten really good feedback from our customers so far. Part of it rides on our reputation of quality and consistency. And, in the past we may have been like, oh, I wish we could be known as a little more creative or a little more whatever, like people just think we're quality and consistent. And actually we're very grateful for that right now. Our cleanliness council, we meet with them often to get advice and to get the latest thinking, obviously with things changing week to week. We have our protocols around PPE, around distancing and masks, and how we clean the rooms, and obviously our products that are aligned with the CDC, the WHO, the WTTC. We've got associate training and engagement running across many different areas. I won't go into the details of it. And we've got, most importantly, these cleanliness champions that are really the point people on property that are making sure all of this is happening. And then just to give you an idea, focusing on the guest experience, we're looking at different moments of truth in the customer experience. We're looking at how do we get as contactless as possible on arrival without losing the friendliness and the engagement. In the guest room, we have, extra cleaning protocols, and then throughout the stay, different things we're doing, highlighting some of the areas here in the guest room to make sure that we're doing either double cleaning or disinfecting, or increasing frequency, in some cases reducing frequency, to make sure that it's all about inspiring consumer confidence. And then in the restaurants, similar, right? Spacing out tables and chairs, new floor plans, grab and goes instead of buffets. And that varies really market by market. I've been surprised at how much we've been able to do buffets in Hong Kong without it affecting anything really at all. And it is, again, all back to consumer confidence and trust. If everyone in Hong Kong basically wore a mask before COVID if they were sick, and it was just part of the way we do what the culture is here. And when you walk around here, like 99% of the people are wearing a mask all the time. And when you have that, you can go to buffets and feel like it's safe. And lastly, in the meetings experience, we've been looking at a lot of things, talking to our customers and trying to figure out how do we give planners the confidence to have a meeting, right? Planners and organizers, and of course the meeting attendees to feel like they are in a place that's safe. And this has been one of the hardest pieces, but we've tried to do as much as we can. I think my picture is not totally coming in here. Maybe it will as we talk, but there's a number of things that we're doing around technology, spacing out when you check into the event, using hybrid solutions, different kinds of meeting sets, frequent disinfecting, again, to make sure, and different check-in procedures and policies that we're really partnering with the planner on to try to facilitate the experience that they want to deliver. So with that, that's what I wanted to share today, but I'm really interested in the discussion and would be happy to answer any questions you have about what we're doing, but love to get into it. And I'll maybe hand it back to you, Leah.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Peggy. Let's do a quick 5-minute Q&A first, and then I'll let you join the panel. So you mentioned earlier that you were previously the CSMO of Marriott APAC, which I assume is still a region that is dear to your heart. In late June, your CEO, Arnie, mentioned that occupancy in China is now in the 40 to 50% range. And then on your slide, I think you also mentioned STR has a number similar to that. But can you give us an update? Is demand finally coming back for summer? What can we learn from China and the rest of the APAC region?
Yeah, it's a great question, and because this whole thing started with China and then the recovery has really been led by China, we've been able to do exactly what you're saying, is look at the different things that we're doing in China and see what we can learn from them. But we are seeing very positive recovery. There was a little bit of a blip, right, in Beijing when they had a return of cases. It's been kind of remarkable to watch that got locked down immediately, and I think it nets out to be about a 2-week blip for us in terms of occupancy and performance. And we're pushing above 50%, I believe, for July. And so we're really happy to see that. the other dynamic we're seeing is that all of the, Sanya used to be a market where we all said there's so many hotels, we'll never be able to fill it. Sanya is running like 80% occupancies in many of our hotels, as all of our Chinese travelers are not going anywhere else. And so they're all going to the beach. And second and third tier city hotels, which also were not as high in occupancy, or have now become the desired places to go, like Chengdu, Qingdao, all these leisure destinations. And so I think it's really about local, domestic, and even, we see that in the US, it's like Wisconsin for Wisconsin. And that's been a tremendous learning for us because we've never really looked at marketing that way, right? We're a global company and we market by brands and markets, but not to that localized and fragmented level. We also see the recovery being very young in China. It's led by the young people. It's very leisure led, although we do see business travel popping much greater than any other market in the world. I think that's because of the volume of domestic travel that's facilitated just within China. So all of these things are great. And then F&B, we've seen also, you can't take food away from the Asia culture, and we see our restaurants kind of filling up. Like in Hong Kong, our restaurants are doing extremely well on the weekends as well as staycations.
Very good. Peggy, there are a lot of questions from the audience. Let me try to consolidate a few of those. In the wake of COVID-19, will you be resorting to any new ventures for innovation processes and technologies or partnerships? For example, AI technology that would help you to reinforce some of the guidelines that you have for each of the properties. And then what about digitization in rooms? What about data reporting at the global brand level?
Yeah, these are great questions. And, I think we were looking at new businesses and new ventures in a different way before all of this happened. I think we're now looking at it through the lens of how do we enable our global recovery? How do we help our hotels either evolve or drive demand or, change if they need to? I think the challenge with investments at the hotel level at this point are obviously, our owners are not making a lot of money right now. And so it's difficult to invest in those technologies at the hotel level. But we are certainly looking at technology, particularly, on the marketing side, and things that will allow us to use data to get to the right people at the right time, more tech and data, particularly in my group. I think those things could be very powerful to enable our recovery.
Thank you. There's a question on collaboration. Is Marriott collaborating with any airlines to try to kind of give air travel a boost?
We would love to collaborate with anybody that would like to give air travel or anything in a boost. I think we have many airline relationships and we are digging in with them in very different ways. And I think, I don't know particularly if we're actually trying to increase air travel. This is tricky, right? I think the key might be though to partner and figure out, what are the source markets and how do we align on that to really create the routes that can really help drive demand to the places that can actually take it. This is the hardest part. It's like before, it was just trying to get the right source market to the right hotels, and you could choose from any market you wanted to send them to. And now you've got this up and down thing going on where it's hard to ever nail something down, right? So, but we would love to collaborate.
Lastly, Peggy, there's a fun question. What is your favorite Marriott property and how is it weathering the storm?
Oh, I always get asked that question and I hate to give the answers because I have 7,000 hotels worldwide that are going to be, mad at me for not. But I will say that one of my favorite hotels that opened just in the last year, right before all of this, was the St. Regis in Hong Kong, and it's in my hometown. And so we have a staycation planned there with a Michelin star dinner, hopefully in a few weeks, and nothing will happen that will prevent that. But it's such a respite. I think it was a great place to go anyway. And now we're going with some friends and family and really looking forward to that stay. It's just a perfect example of what a St. Regis should be, which is like a small mansion inside in a best address in a great city.
Thank you again, Peggy, for the keynote. Please have a seat as we transition into the next section. So for today's panel discussion, we will have two good-looking moderators, Amir Amidi, who is our founder and managing partner for travel, and Jordan Bray, our head of corporate partnerships. Gentlemen, pleasure. Please take it away.
Hey guys, how's it going? Oh, I think Amir's connecting.
Sorry guys, this is Amir. Olivia, can you start my video? It doesn't allow me to start my video. Sorry about that. Peggy, thank you so much for that presentation and Q&A session. I think it's a strange world that we live in, and there's a lot of unknown factors here. And hopefully discussions like this will shed some light on what to expect in the coming months, although it's such a fluid situation, as you mentioned, in Hong Kong, which was one of the, I would say, areas that was doing a fantastic job at getting back to somewhat normal. It seems like things have gone sideways there again. So appreciate you joining us. It's an absolute pleasure to be with all of you. Wanted to introduce our two additional panelists today. We have Amy Daniels-Burr, Managing Director of Operations and Partnerships at Jetblue Technology Ventures, the CVC arm of JetBlue. Had the pleasure of working with Amy for a number of years and her colleagues at JTV. And they were actually one of the first corporate partners to join our travel and hospitality practice out of Silicon Valley. And also absolute pleasure to have Jeffrey Goh, Chief Executive Officer of Star Alliance. As Leo mentioned, one of the best alliances around the globe. Really looking forward to hearing your thoughts about business travel and what we can expect in the coming months. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amir Amidi. I have been affiliated with Plug and Play for a number of years, but had the pleasure of launching the travel and hospitality practice for Plug and Play in 2016 out of Silicon Valley. And I'm accompanied by Jordan Bray, who's going to be the second moderator for the panel. Jordan has been with our practice for a number of years, and he's the head of corporate partnerships. So let's get started. If we can turn on the camera for Jeffrey and Amy, Olivia, and Peggy. All right. So the first question, welcome Amy and Jeffrey. Thank you so much for joining us today. Jeffrey, I believe you're out of Frankfurt today, and Amy is here with us in Northern California. I really appreciate you guys joining the panel. The first question is for Amy and Jeffrey. The question is, once we return to business travel again, do you think there will be a drastic change in initial demographics, and how will you cater to that? Meaning, do you see signals from the market currently where younger people have more confidence on going through the airport, getting on a plane, staying at a property, or the signals are not there yet? And maybe, Amy, we start with you.
Sure. You know, that's an interesting question. And I think a lot of it is going to be tied with one of the things that Peggy mentioned in her presentation, which is that especially the younger generation and the younger demographic are finding that they can work wherever they want to work. And so the question will be, do they feel that they need to travel to have those meetings, or can they stay at the beach where they decided to hunker down during you know, this time when they can work from home and work from anywhere? So I think people are looking at these things differently, and they certainly, I think the younger demographic certainly thinks that feels more comfortable traveling, and we've seen that from this concept of the digital nomad and the feel that they can go anywhere that they want to go and spend their time in different places than they are right now, versus maybe the older travelers that are kind of hunkering down at home. But I think a lot of it has to do with some of the things that we've already talked about, which is what are the corporations going to dictate for their travelers? Their corporate travel policies will probably really dictate how much travel will come back and who will actually be the ones flying. But I do think that the younger demographic may feel more comfortable more quickly if a corporation says now that they can travel or should travel for business. So I think that's what we're seeing, but it's hard to say. It's a whole new world out there right now, and maybe Jeffrey is seeing something a little different.
Yeah, I think, I'll just layer on top of what Amy has said. I think it's really uncertain at the moment because you have a panoply of considerations to take into account, right? In that you've got on the one hand government restrictions. When are those restrictions going to be lifted? And that's going to define to some degree whether business or leisure market will return and at which speed. I think if you have a domestic market, the younger generation, the leisure market, you will probably see an uptick in demand. But when you talk about business, international business travel, that's going to be very dependent on the international borders being open again. So I think it's important to understand the segmentation between business and leisure, international, domestic, and then you begin to talk about, the age groups, and then I think importantly, the role that technology has played in the last 4 or 5 months in dictating which part of these segments will actually come back first. But it's so uncertain in a way because I think, as maybe Peggy touched on a little bit, there is a concern certainly in the airline industry about as and when we actually enter into a second wave, however you define that. There might be some countries where you don't actually have a second wave. I mean, there are talks that the United States actually is one big wave. There's no break between the first and the second. And then you've got other countries from Australia to New Zealand, which did really well at the beginning, now beginning to see a spike in infections. And so that's going to impact, I think, the sort of demographic perspectives of the return of the traffic.
Thank you both. If I can follow up with another question, and this is for all 3 panelists, including you, Peggy. Plug and Play went into work from home mode on March 13th, and obviously a lot of us have not stepped foot in the office since then. And thankfully, we haven't canceled a single event at Plug and Play. A lot of our business is dependent around events for the accelerator program and meeting with startups, meeting with corporate partners. Although it's not business as usual, I would say, video conferencing platforms have gone a long way on keeping us afloat. And we spent millions of dollars on business travel in 2019. So the executive team at Plug and Play, now they're reconsidering when things go back to normal, whether it's, a vaccine or some kind of treatment that turns this virus into a common cold, do we need to go back to business travel like we used to? Or can we actually conduct some of the meetings on Zoom or other video conferencing platforms and save some money in the meantime without hurting the business? So the question is, for all of you, do you have the fear or the concern that this pandemic will change the mentality of corporations when it comes to business travel? And are they going to be inclined that they could actually spend less money on business travel and keep their businesses afloat or even thriving in the coming years? And maybe we start with you, Peggy.
Great, thank you for asking the question that's on all of our minds all of the time here at Marriott. But personally, I think it will. I mean, I sit in the middle of all the insights every week, and I read, what many of our companies are saying, and certainly in the short term, it will, and the length of this situation will, establish some of these behaviors for a longer period of time. If it's been 6 months and we kind of bounce back, I think it wouldn't necessarily. So I think a couple things will probably happen. Again, nobody knows. Nobody has a crystal ball, but here are my projections for what it's worth. I think that people will value the face-to-face connections, right? If I'm going to a meeting and I'm going to get to move a relationship forward and have a dinner and get work done and close a deal, I'm going to go. If I'm going to go to attend a meeting and I'm just a participant, I'm not going to go, right? If I'm going to go to a big meeting and I was just going for content, I'm probably not going to go. And part of what was happening before is that it was so easy, right? It was so easy. The price point was right. And you didn't have that filter of like, do I need to go? Should I go? Can I afford it? As much as you will now. And so you just went. If I could go to Singapore and back in the day, I did. If I went, I could go to Japan. I could go from Hong Kong anywhere almost in Asia. I dare say I kind of went to India, right, for 24 hours if I wanted to. And I never really thought twice about it. And it was such a lovely thing, but it's going to take a long time to get back to that. And I do think that this has been for everybody, like much easier than they thought. And so it'll just change the way people think about meetings, well, the way businesses think about meetings and the way we use space. And in some ways, the hybrid meetings are better. Like you see these companies doing these big, the Salesforces of the world and the Microsofts of the world doing big, virtual events that you never thought you could do virtual, and they're getting a lot of volume in terms of people participating, and in some ways more people could ever participate than before, and there's some good to come of that too. So I think it's all going to change, and I am concerned, but I am also excited because it creates all this opportunity for all of us, to do something different and find new revenue streams.
Thank you, Peggy. Jeffrey, can we hear your thoughts on that? What the new norm will be for business travel once there's a vaccine or sufficient treatment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the way we will want to look at this is perhaps, kind of the short term and the long term. I think one view of looking at it from a short term perspective is that we'll probably see a spike in travel when a vaccine is around, when quarantines are no longer around, or maybe positive, testings are much more commonly available. And there's no concern that I go to Shanghai and then all of a sudden there's a lockdown and I cannot come back again. Right? So I think in the short term, we probably will see a spike in terms of businesses that are trying to reestablish relationships, right, with their existing clients, with their key accounts. And that's very important for business to do that. Longer term, I think the industry is probably preparing for us a 25-30% smaller in terms of business travel. And that is, I think, a reflection of the tail of the global economic impact that the crisis will have. The cost reductions that companies will impose, the convenience of technology that will be around. So if you take, for example, if you look at maybe a mergers and acquisition deal or any other sort of transaction that's going to happen, we might probably see at the beginning that travel is going to happen to establish that relationship, and then the in-betweens, where you used to just jump on a flight for your meetings, probably will reduce quite significantly. And then you have the kind of the closing meeting to wrap things up. And that's probably the kind of projections that we can see in the longer term. But certainly, I think in the short term, we might see a pleasant increase, I would say, in business travel.
Very interesting. Amy, any thoughts on that?
I think very similar to what both Peggy and Jeffrey have already talked about. But even before this panel started, we were talking about just the travel that we've all done, and I kind of think about it as in four kind of categories: less about the time frame and more about what are you doing when you're traveling, right? There's the intercompany meetings, and I spend a lot of time on the road doing intercompany meetings and going to different offices within our own company. And I think, I just read an article yesterday that out of 300 companies, global companies surveyed, 90% of them will change their policy on how much interaction there needs to be within the company in person. So I think that category is really going to change. And then there's the concept of meeting with your partner companies. And Jeffrey just mentioned that, like, you're going to want to reestablish those connections. And I think that's really very real. Then there's the concept of new potential clients. And in our business, the business of actual JetBlue Tech Ventures, the CVC world, there's a lot of conversation around how hard it is to actually connect with startups you're considering as a potential portfolio company without actually seeing them in person. And so that concept of potential new clients or new partners or new, in our case, new potential investments, there's some desire to meet face-to-face, and that may come back maybe quicker. But then there's a concept of conferences and meetings. And I spend a lot of my time personally on the road going to conferences and meetings and events. And I think those might be a little trickier. That many people in a single space, there may be, a little bit more of a desire to hold that type of traffic off. So, I think about it in the types of travel that you're doing, because that's my personal life and I travel a lot for business, and it does fall into those different categories. And I think some of those categories will come back faster than others. And certainly the concept of meeting with others outside of your company will be more compelling than just trying to force meetings within your company.
And I mean,
That's the way I think about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Amy.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think it's worth adding, as I speak to some of our CEOs around the Alliance as well, I think culture is also an important perspective, right? I think, there are certain cultures that continue to want to shake the hands and continue to want to be, to have face-to-face meeting in the presence of others. And I think that we shouldn't overlook that part of it as well, because I think there's some limit or limitations to technology as well at the end of the day. I mean, if you blanked out your video now, I cannot actually see you if you're rolling your eyes on the comment that I'm making, or you're falling asleep, for example. But if you're in a boardroom, it's a slightly different interaction and different dynamic that comes out of that.
Definitely.
Yeah, very true.
Very good point, Jeffrey. In favor of time, thank you for breaking it down in detail. Jordan, why don't you take the next question?
Yeah, I have another question. This one's for Jeffrey. You guys recently published an open letter to all your customers in Star Alliance and launched a travel information hub. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think for us at Star Alliance, we've been through and we're going through a couple of different phases. We went through a phase of adjusting to the crisis and then adapting to the new world, and then a stage where we were looking to see how we restore confidence. And now we're beginning to address a stage of incentivizing travel and what we can do with that. And Peggy mentioned, or there was a question about collaboration and partnerships with hotels, and that's what we're also trying to look at as a means of incentivizing travel. But in that restoring confidence phase, which is still where we're in, there are a couple of things that we've been looking at, and they fall into basically two pillars. One is protection and one is information. Protection in the sense of the set of commitments that we publish across the Alliance in terms of health and hygiene commitments, protection in terms of new technologies that we're adopting in terms of contactless and touchless experience. But on a travel information hub, it was more on the information side. Now, the idea is, if you imagine you're flying from San Francisco and then you're going to Hong Kong and then transiting to Bangkok, do you know what United requires you in terms of the health measures and requirements that they've put in place? And if you're connecting in Hong Kong to Thai Airways or to Singapore Airlines, do you know what Singapore Airlines requires? On top of that, do you know what San Francisco Airport is requiring or has put in place? And Hong Kong Airport has that, or Singapore or Bangkok. So the idea of the Travel Information Hub is for you to be able to just type in your airline or your origin or your destination, and then you will have the information pulled out. In a couple of weeks' time, we'll actually be releasing a more personalized version where it is going to be itinerary based. You simply put in your 3 points of airports and your 2 airlines, and you actually get the information as to what to expect. Do you need a public health declaration? Do you need a vaccination? Do you have to have immunity passports before then? So that is really to help customers prepare for their trip.
Got it.
I love that, Jeff. That exact thing happened to me when I got my family flew back. We were stuck in the U.S. for 3 months, and we flew back in April, and we must have spent 7 days agonizing over whether we could transit through Japan. And we couldn't. We called Japan immigration, we called the airport, we called our friends, we called the travel agents, we got different answers. And finally we got on the flight and said, let's hope we'll make it. If anything, we'll be together.
Right. Well, and we're talking from the perspective of people who are very used to and very familiar with traveling. Yet there is this mass and chaos of airline information, airport information, country information that's out there.
Crazy. It was crazy. So good luck with that. I think that'll be huge. We'll all benefit from that.
Well, maybe this pandemic will make people, I guess, feel more comfortable like sharing that information, and different stakeholders in the industry actually sharing data and being more comfortable in that sense. So it'll be interesting to see. This next question is for Peggy. So business travel seems to be like the bread and butter of like loyalty platforms. For Marriott Bonvoy, like has your guys' strategy changed at all?
Yes. Almost immediately. I guess I shared some of the things in the front of my presentation, right? Homes and villas and restaurants and bars and retail. I think the name of the game now for us is how do we keep our best members and our customers engaged? And we see obviously leisure travel leading the way in the recovery right now in every market. And so all of a sudden we're shifting to our secondary segment and saying, the good thing is that all of our business travelers do travel for leisure. And so how do we kind of, change the tone of what we're talking about, change the content on the websites, change our offering, and get people to try things. One thing that's been really helpful for us is we have the Marriott Bonvoy credit card. And obviously, if you're a business traveler and you're earning points, you're spending a lot to earn those points. And by shifting to groceries and gas, right, 10x points on groceries and gas, we've been able to keep people engaged. So I think mostly right now we're saying, how do we keep people engaged in a transaction, whatever it might be? And then we're watching the data to see what picks up. But because we've been dabbling in a lot of things, like we were supposed to launch Ritz-Carlton yachts this year. We launched Homes and Villas a year ago. We've had this retail product. I think now because we had seeds in all these things, we're going to be able to figure out where we're going to invest further from here to diversify our revenue streams.
That's great. Thank you. And then I guess I have one more question for you, Peggy, and then I'll pass back to Amir. How have you seen the relationship between brands and ownership groups change during this pandemic? And are there like long-term effects of that?
I think that in times of crisis, you kind of band together. And if there was any sort of maybe more tension, or, there's always the owner and manager relationship and one always wanting to get more out of the other. But I find in this time that we're really partnering together, full transparency, figuring out how we can help our owners. We've reduced initiatives and costs to the extent we can, because we are all in it together. And so I think that theme maybe speaks for our industry too. I think we probably all need to come together a little bit closer and figure out, like, how do we get out of this thing, hand in hand. So yeah, I don't know, no major changes, but mostly I think maybe even more collaborative than before.
Definitely. I think from the plug and play perspective, like, we haven't seen this much collaboration ever between like competitors, if you will. Like a few weeks back, we hosted an airport roundtable with like 50 airports around the world. And just like the willingness to share what different airports are working on, or technologies they might be evaluating, was just really, really great to see.
That's great. That's good.
Amir?
Thanks, Jordan. This is for all three of you. Maybe we start with you, Amy. There's always a balancing act, what you do during the pandemic and what are you going to keep doing post-pandemic. So the question is, what initiatives have you or your organization undertaken during the pandemic that you actually foresee will still be around after this crisis that we're all facing?
Yeah, I'm going to speak a little bit, not to speak for JetBlue, but on behalf of JetBlue Airways, and some of the work that we've actually been helping them with. And, I think some of this will really has resonated with our customers and will continue even beyond this initial phase of, the crisis feeling. But, we've spent a lot of time talking about, and we've all talked about this on this panel already, but, things that will help and with safety and health, the health of our customers, and making them actually just feel good about getting on a plane again. JetBlue has an entire program called Safety from the Ground Up, where they're really looking at every aspect of the customer, travel ribbon, and how that we control, and how can we put in place measures that make people feel really good about how we are handling the crisis. But a lot of the work that we've been doing is around how new technology will help us change those specific areas. Maybe it's sanitization, and it's UV cleaning, and some of those companies that are tackling things from a more technology perspective. A lot of it's around contactless journey, and Jeffrey mentioned that. And we're doing an entire sprint right now with all of our partners throughout our entire ecosystem on what touch points within the travel journey can we change with contactless technologies. And that's been a really big deal. And I think that will definitely persist beyond as those things come into play and those things are implemented. A lot of those technologies will just be loved by everybody and will continue long after this becomes a real crisis, beyond the crisis mode. So we're spending a lot of time on that type of things. Things like, we spent a lot of time researching what is the new technology in thermal scanning. Now, maybe that won't live beyond kind of the more immediate needs, but like some of the other things will definitely change how we travel and change how customers interact with the travel companies within the travel ribbon, and contactless technologies will definitely persist beyond. So I think that's some of the things that we're really working on, and JetBlue's doing an amazing job of just thinking about their entire interaction with customers and how they can make people feel really great about the experience, and a lot of those things will continue to live.
Thank you, Amy. Jeffrey, your thoughts on that? Like, what initiatives do you see your air carriers have undertaken that you hope to see will last beyond the pandemic?
Well, I mean, I echo pretty much everything that Amy has said there. I think, quite apart from the fact that customers will get used to many of these touchless and contactless opportunities or functionalities, and the convenience that comes with that is once you've installed this technology and this infrastructure, it is not always easy just to wake up the next morning and just kind of uninstall these technologies, right? Your biometrics, cameras, and so on and so forth. So I think that's going to be, those kind of things that will outlive. And I'd even say that the crisis has just fast forwarded these technology developments. I mean, even without this crisis, the industry would have gone down that road. But then for sure, there are some measures that we have put in place today that, with a bit of luck, they will be short-term measures and we will need them, because of vaccine or some other developments, wearing a face mask, for example, physical distancing at airport or on board. I think those things will disappear because they will be they're very functional. They're a function of the pandemic. Until the next pandemic. But we've learned our lesson. We have the SOPs, we have all the procedures to deal with that. That is very true. Peggy, any thoughts on that?
I'd echo everyone's comments on contactless, and I think the biometric piece, facial recognition, I think it will accelerate adoption and integration of those things, where it may have been more difficult even from a consumer perspective to use some of those things in the past. For us, leisure, right? All the different things that we're doing to invest in leisure business will stick with us longer term. And then lastly, because the recovery will be very fragmented and localized, all the investments in technology that we will make to be able to enable more segmentation, more targeting, more customization, market by market, customer by customer, I think that will also just be accelerated and also live on from there.
Got it. I wish we would have allocated more time for Q&A. We have a ton of them in the Q&A box. So if the panelists could stick around after this segment and answer some of them, it would be great. But we're going to ask one question for Jeffrey and Amy. This is from the audience. Post 9/11, people could travel but didn't want to. During COVID, people want to travel but can't. What have you learned about the psychology of messaging so that customers remain engaged and ready to go when able?
Well, it's a really great question. It is an interesting dynamic that is a little different than 9/11. And those of us who've been in the industry for a really long time, we certainly take some of the learnings from that time, but it's very different. I think that the most important thing right now, and Jeffrey, you mentioned it when you were talking about this great information portal that you've put out. People just, the psychology that we're seeing is people just want to know information. Like, what is going on? What do I need to do? What are the rules that I have to follow? How are things cleaned? They want to actually know the details. Which is really, I think, unusual in our industry, that people really want this real detailed information about how their lives are being impacted right now in certain ways. But I think the information flow is going to be the most important, and things like the Star Alliance, information, customer information kind of hub concept is really important. People want to understand what they're getting into, what the rules are, and how they can follow those. I would say people can travel. I mean, I think it's different for us, JetBlue. We are mostly domestic airline, and people can travel, but there's certain rules that they have to follow. And that's actually what people are most concerned about. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean? Do I have to quarantine? Do I have to quarantine when I go to that state? Can I go and visit this person? Like, what is my rule that I have to follow? And the more information flow that we can give them, more information about their specific needs within that travel itinerary, I think the better. And that will ease that kind of into people into travel here, especially in the United States. That's what we're finding.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, that, I think Amy said a lot of the important things there. I think what I would just simply add is, in recent aviation history, 9/11 was really a shock to the system. And then people really retreated from flying, or there's a big fear of flying there over something that you really have no control over in a way, right? And this time around, I guess we've maybe found a way to deal with travel restrictions, to deal with a crisis, to deal with a pandemic. It's a slightly different kind of concern as opposed to, security versus public health. But public health, I have a little bit more control over that, right? In the sense of it's my own health, my own being. But what I need is more information about how I then fit in to that category. Am I okay to travel? Am I not okay to travel? And then I can make the decision there myself. So what we've done is actually we've run a couple of surveys, like many stakeholders in the industries have run a lot of surveys to understand future behaviors and future expectations. And I think it's very important to do that because that's part of your engagement process. And then the changes that you'll be looking to make will then be, or you hope at least, will be aligned to their future expectations and behavior. So one of the things that we will need to change in terms of experience is in the lounges. There are concerns that, I'm spending too much time in the lounge, 1-2 hours, and I'm, exposing myself to open food, so those expectations are there. And I think we need to change and align to that. I'm sure it's the same in the hospitality industry too.
I know we're running over a little bit, Peggy, but I think it's important to hear from you on this question as well, and then we'll wrap it up.
I think these guys covered it, and I said a little bit about it. It's a challenging, I think I'll look at it from the consumer perspective. I mentioned this in my deck that we, Marriott and all of the companies, right, have done all of these things to make it clean and safe, and all of our associates are wearing masks when you come in. Like, we've done everything I think that we can to build confidence that we've got a good experience, yet still we cannot control the factors of the other people coming in, right? And whether what you're doing when you're there. And that's the big debate right now. And when you're in a community where that's the default culture, it's so much easier. And you can see that in the results, right? You see that in Greater China, you see it in Hong Kong. And I think you'll see that play out where you have cultures that will just be able to lock down. And everybody is this, there's this community mentality of like, if we all lock down, like we'll all be freed again, then it works much faster. It's just a fascinating dynamic, right? And that's really hard to orchestrate in some parts of the world. So.
All right, I lied. I'm going to ask one yes or no question to end this. And it may be a loaded question, and maybe we start with you, Jeffrey. Is it safe to travel for business right now? Meaning getting on a plane, going to an airport, getting in a taxi or Uber, staying at a hotel. Do you personally feel safe to take a business trip?
I've flown 3 times in the last month. Not all of them for business. But I think if customers adhere to the operating procedures as advised by airport personnel and airline personnel, I think it's safe to travel.
Amy?
Yes, 100%. I think it's safe to travel. I've traveled. I've flown as well. Not for business yet, but for pleasure. And I feel safer on. I was on a JetBlue airplane, of course. I felt safer on the JetBlue airplane than I do in my local grocery store. So yes.
Peggy?
My answer, I think it might be safer now to fly than any other time. And I think, to be honest, like I dragged my family across the world from DC back to Hong Kong, and we didn't know if we could get through immigration, and we had to land and take tests at Hong Kong airport and spend the night and wait for results, and then quarantine at home for 2 weeks, wearing, straps on our wrists and being tracked for 2 weeks. And I was tested when I landed, and I was tested 2 weeks at the end. I feel like I might be the safest person you could be around right now. I absolutely think if you can travel now, there's nobody traveling.
Yeah, that's what I always say to my family too. It's probably the safest time to go to the airport, sit on a plane, or stay at a hotel.
And Peggy, I've stayed at several Marriotts lately, and they've been wonderful.
Thank you. For all of those who are on this call, and thank you for staying with us.
Guys, I have one more question. Personal side, sorry. Is there anything that you've picked up or like a new hobby or something that you look forward to every day when you're like working at home? Like I've been road biking a lot and like trying to cook a lot of like different meals. So I'd love to hear from you guys if there's anything you've picked up.
I'll start. Oh, go ahead, Amy.
No, go for it. Go for it. Go ahead.
Say that in my 2-week quarantine in Hong Kong, I wasn't able to have my daily Starbucks latte. And so I finally had to hunker down, figure out how to make a latte myself. And I also didn't have a coffee grinder, so I used a mortar and pestle. So I am an official barista.
That's pretty good. My thing is just when I'm here, when I'm not traveling, I have a long commute in the Bay Area. For those of people in the San Francisco Bay Area and other, metropolitan areas, sometimes the commute can be really bad. So instead of doing a long commute, since I've been home since March 12th as well, I spend a lot more time. I've always worked out in the morning, but now I spend a lot more time working out in the morning, and I kind of like it. It's great. I feel healthier. So yeah, that's my thing.
Jeffrey?
Trying to perfect the banana cake, Jordan.
Banana cake.
Not the sourdough. That sounds wonderful. I really appreciate you guys extending a few extra minutes this morning, our time. I think that based on the feedback we see in the Q&A tab, I think everybody enjoyed the session. Mr. Chen, would you like to have the closing remarks here for 60 seconds?
Yes, absolutely. It would be a pleasure. I want to give a big shout out to Olivia as our unsung hero to make today's production smooth. If you have any questions, please contact Jordan via LinkedIn or email. Shortly after today's session, you will be receiving a 1-minute survey and your participation will be appreciated. Also, our ventures team will be publishing a white paper pretty soon on how COVID is impacting each subsector under travel and how emerging tech could help. Please follow us on LinkedIn so that you could get a timely copy as well as notifications of upcoming virtual discussions. That's it. No matter where you are, from the entire Plug and Play travel team, our best to all of you for staying safe and healthy. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Amy, Jeffrey, and Peggy so much. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye, everyone.